Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you for coming out this day after a snowstorm. I know folks are still kind of digging out and everything, so we appreciate you coming out to hear about the follow-up to the original Complete Streets forum we had a couple months back now, when we kind of outlined how the project was going to work and the prioritization plan and the type of work that would go into understanding how to come up with a priority list of projects in town that would address bike safety and traffic issues throughout town. So we've looked at a lot of the responses that folks have provided us, and there were quite a few, and it was great to see that much turnout from folks. And we have met several times trying to distill it all, and we've had our consultants, Howard Stein Hudson, both here tonight, Elizabeth Flanagan and Casey Yu. And they tonight are going to just kind of explain how the process went, how the data was turned into kind of an initial list of projects. We'll talk a little bit about the types of designs and the other types of things that work on, or that could work on streets, rural streets, such as Stowe's. And we'll have some time for Q&A and a general sense of, what comes next and what does the kind of long-term look like from next year and out 3, 4, or 5 years from now. And so I'll hand it over to them and we can get it together. Oh, thank you. Yes, I meant to do that. So there is a police training outside tonight. They are going to be firing off paintball guns, and one of the officers said that they sound real, and so we didn't want anyone to get confused. So if you hear any blasts out there, it is paintball guns, and hopefully nothing to worry about. So with that, I'll hand it over to Elizabeth.
Hello. Thank you, everyone, for making it out to our second public meeting. I am Elizabeth Flanagan. I'm here with Howard Stein Hudson. I'm the project manager for this project, and I'm here with Casey, who is a transportation planner and has been doing a ton of work on this project. And of course, the Complete Streets Committee has been putting in a lot of legwork on this, so thank you to you as well, everyone who's here from there. So I'm going to do a quick review of Complete Streets and the funding program for anyone who was not here at our first public meeting. We're going to go through pretty quickly. Basically, Complete Streets are streets that address all modes and all users, regardless of age or ability. And these projects can be quite small. It can just be a crosswalk at the appropriate location, or it can be a shared use path or an intersection reconstruction. So really a range of scale of projects. For the Complete Streets funding program, this is a DOT program. There are 3 tiers to achieve funding through the program. The first tier, which Stowe has already completed, was to do a Complete Streets training and then draft and submit a Complete Streets policy, which was then reviewed and approved by Mass DOT. And then that brings you to tier 2, which is where the town is at currently. This is to develop a Complete Streets prioritization plan. And basically, that is just a comprehensive list of projects throughout town that are then ranked based on priority on criteria that the town has dictated to us. So the planning assistance is up to $50,000, so that's a reimbursable amount from Mass DOT. And then once you submit the Complete Streets prioritization plan, which will be quite soon, then you can apply for up to $400,000 worth of construction funding. Again, that's a reimbursable amount. And so the construction funding is just for construction. Design is not a part of that. And so the projects that you want to submit for this year of funding application should really be low design or things that are already designed, things that can go shovel in the ground quickly, so that you only have 1 year once you get approved for the funding to use it. So you want to make sure that the projects are ready to go as soon as you get approval from Mass DOT. So again, we're in tier 2 of the process. And what does that entail? So Howard Stein Hudson, which is my firm, has been working with the town of Stowe to compile existing studies, plans, and projects. We reviewed all of those. We did quite a bit of existing conditions analysis, which we presented at the last public meeting. And then we used all of this input as well as community input to identify areas where there are deficient conditions for pedestrians, bikes, ADA accessibility, as well as vehicles, where there's high utility. So what are the areas that most need help, and how can we address that? We gathered input from the community as well as town officials, and we've been working with the town to develop that list of projects. And now the final phase that we're in is to prioritize those projects rank them, figure out the construction schedule for which projects make the most sense to go after right away, and then we'll move forward with submitting the Tier 2 documentation. So prior to this meeting, we had another public meeting where we gathered input from the community. We also had an online tool called a wiki map, which was, you could access the link online, you could go put pins for various issues, you could comment, write your ideas, what you saw as a problem, what your vision was. You could also agree with other people's comments or disagree with them. So the results that we got from that, we had 101 people post comments and 830 actual comments. So 101 people, 830 comments. Of those, 565 were based on pedestrian conditions, 191 were bicycle, and 74 were about ADA and accessibility. So from the graphs, the top bar for all of them are other, which are comments. So about 30% of all the comments that we got were either, for the most part, agreeing with other people's comments, lending support to the projects that were already being suggested. For pedestrians, the top project request was top issue was missing or obstructed sidewalks. For bicycles, a lack of bicycle accommodations, and for ADA, high vehicular speeds. Putting all of those comments together for all the modes, the 4 top concerns are high vehicle speeds, high vehicle volumes, missing sidewalks or obstructed sidewalks, and dangerous or difficult crossings. So we digged a little further into the top 4 concerns. So high vehicular speeds and volumes, these are heat maps showing the concentration of comments that we got on those 2 categories. And you can see that Great Road and the southern portion of Gleasondale Road are where those comments really concentrate. And then for sidewalks and difficult crossings, again, we see Great Road, the southern portion of Gleasondale Road, and particularly Lower Village and the town center are some of those hot spots. And you'll notice that for pedestrians, likely if there's not a sidewalk, the crossing probably is also difficult or dangerous, so they kind of mirror each other in terms of where the pedestrian priorities are. And then from the public meeting, we also got quite a few comments. We broke out into little breakout sessions, and people had the chance to write on maps and share their ideas, and we did a report back session with that. And the comments that we got from the public meeting were a desire to fill pedestrian network gaps, so sidewalk construction or reconstruction. A lot of the roads are heavily used by cyclists, and there's no accommodations for them. A lot of roads, the character of the town, there's a lot of curvy roads and blind curves. And with that, some unsafe intersections where it's hard to see as you pull up to the intersection, it's difficult to see oncoming vehicles. And some of the intersections are skewed, meaning the road comes in at an angle, which makes it harder for you to see an oncoming vehicle, but also allows you to take that right turn at a higher speed, which is unsafe for other vehicles or cyclists that are already in the road that you're turning into. And then kind of the overarching theme was calming roads with high vehicle speeds and volumes. So after we had gathered all of that public input, we'd done the existing conditions analysis, then we worked with the town and the Complete Streets Committee to identify a list of potential projects. And once I'm finished going through kind of the process, Casey's going to dig into what those projects were and how we chose them and what some of the improvements are, what the design features are. So the sources that went into the draft project list, again, a lot of community input. So the public meeting comments, we had town survey results, we worked with town priorities, so existing projects and ideas that were already floating around, the wiki map, Gleasondale Road survey results, some recommendations from the MPO, recommendations from MAPC, and then also the existing conditions analysis. So finally, as I mentioned, we are in the last stage of this to actually prioritize all those projects based on the existing conditions, demand, equity, and stakeholder input. So how will we be prioritizing them? One part of that is going to be demand. This is a Strava map, which is a phone app that you can use if you're riding your bike or jogging, and it just shows the concentration of people that are using each roadway. And so this is actually, for me, the opposite of intuitive, that white is the most highly used, and red is the least used. So the highest priority roads that are white would be Great Road, Gleasondale Road, South and West Acton roads, which makes sense. Those are the connecting roads. And then for medium priority, Delaney Street, Lantern Lane, Old Bolton Road, and then all the other kind of dark red roads are lower usage. Another aspect that we look at in terms of demand is points of interest throughout town and how well a project would allow you to access those points of interest. So for pedestrian projects, we look in a half mile, basically a walking distance around the project, and see how many points of interest would this project allow you to get to. Similarly, for cycling, we look at a mile buffer. What sort of utility does this project enable? And then from our conversations with the town, we had 3 critical areas, which again, we wanted to see if a project was within walking or biking distance of these critical areas, which are Lower Village, Gleasondale Village, and the town center. Safety, of course, is a priority. We looked at pedestrian and cyclist crashes between 2013 and 2015, and we are currently working with the town to get the most up-to-date vehicle crash information so we can incorporate that as well. We look at bicycle level of comfort, and this is something that we talked about at the last meeting, but basically it's a measure of, regardless of the facility or whether the existence or not of a bicycle facility, how comfortable is the road for you to use. And so this looks at road width, the number of lanes, speed, volume. And so we want to consider not only where are the priority areas now with existing conditions, so where most needs improvement, but what level of improvement does the project afford. And then similarly for pedestrians, we also look at comfort. And you can see all the gray streets lack sidewalks, so there are a lot of network connection, a lot of connections that can be made within the network. So that's something that we want to prioritize. And then again, what level of increase does the project provide? So is it sidewalk construction? That would be a high level of increase for your pedestrian level of comfort. And then finally for pedestrians, whether it provides a crossing improvement. And so this could be anything from a crosswalk or a pedestrian signal, or even just narrowing an intersection to make the crossing distance for pedestrians a little bit shorter. We look at network connectivity. So as you can see on Crescent Street, there's a gap in the sidewalk network. So if a project connects 2 sidewalks together, that would be a network connection. Or if it expands the network outward, that would also be a positive thing. If it's just a stretch of sidewalk in the middle of nowhere, that's probably not as much use to the town, so that would receive a lower priority within the ranking. We want to be considerate of persons with disabilities, so we look through census data, the American Community Survey, at where the highest concentrations of people with disabilities are, so that we can be sure to provide them with ADA accessible facilities. And we also consider projects that are within walking distance of any active adult neighborhoods. And then for schools, we want to be sure to consider where children could walk. So this is a half-mile buffer around the school to show a reasonable walking distance around a school. Where could students walk if there were appropriate facilities that were safe? And then finally, we look at stakeholder input. So the number of comments that a project got, that would go into the priority. So if a project had a lot of agreement, comments that agreed on the comment, we would want to make sure that that has a level of priority within the ranking. And so again, that draws on town comments, public meeting comments, the wiki map, as well as the survey results that we got. So all of this comes together. This is what the actual prioritization plan looks like. I'm not expecting you to read this because it's very small, but DOT just gets a spreadsheet, essentially. At the end of the day, they get a ranked spreadsheet with the prioritization ranking, project description, location, and then you can check off whether it addresses safety, pedestrian, ADA accessibility, cycling, or vehicular or freight operations. And then we do cost estimates for the top projects that may be scheduled for construction in the first 5 years, and then a proposed construction date. So the proposed construction date is really what is significant in order to apply for Tier 3, which is the final phase of this funding program. The projects that you apply for Tier 3, those are the ones that for this year you would be aiming to get up to $400,000 of construction funding for. So a couple key points about how DOT treats this program. Projects don't have to be constructed in order of priority. So the prioritization helps justify your project choices to DOT. However, they want you to have the flexibility to be able to take advantage of opportunities. So if you're already doing a project and one of these Complete Streets projects would fit in nicely with that, jump down the list and do that project. You don't have to be held to a list that maybe your priorities change next year or something happens that something else becomes a top priority. They want you to have that flexibility. As I mentioned before, funds cannot be used for design. So the projects that are pursued in this year should be low design, shovel in the ground immediately as soon as you get notice to proceed from Mass DOT. The funds need to be used within 1 year of when you get that notification from DOT. So again, smaller projects or groups of smaller projects are probably better so that you can go through them quickly, do them concurrently, rather than maybe a giant, intersection reconstruction project that might take 2 years or something like that. And then finally, funds cannot currently be used on state-owned roads. There may be a process to allow this in the future. Stowe, fortunately, has very few state-owned roads for this program, fortunately, only at the bridge location. So that's just something to keep in mind. And at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Casey, who is going to talk about the 107 projects that we came up with that are throughout town.
Hi, everyone. So, as Liz said, there are about 107 total projects that we have on the prioritization plan. And as shown on the map, there are different types of projects that range from pedestrian to bike improvements or a combination of the two that are spread out throughout the town. The pedestrian improvements shown in pedestrian and ADA improvements are shown in yellow, and a lot of those projects include sidewalk construction or reconstruction, intersection realignment, and crosswalks with ADA compliant curb ramps. Bicycle improvements, which are shown in green, include advisory shoulders, shoulder widening, and share the road signage. And bicycle and pedestrian improvements, which is a combination of the two, are shown in purple, and projects that we have that benefit both users include projects such as share the roads, shared use paths, and truck restriction for specific corridors. And in the next few slides, I'll go into detail about the specific projects by town Quadrant, and then explain a couple of design ideas that are mentioned in the plan. So in the northeast quadrant, examples of the types of improvements we included in the plan are sidewalk reconstruction and construction along Crescent Street. That will be supplemented with crosswalks and ADA compliant curb ramps on the Hartley Road and Crescent Street intersection. We will also include children crossing and school zone signage in town center. So for South Acton Road, we included shoulder widening along one side of the road from West Acton Road to the Acton Town line. This will be supplemented with share the road signs. There is potential for a shared use path along one side of this corridor. That is more of a long-term project since that will require extensive design and right-of-way takings. However, shoulder widening, which is the more short-term option, is a great advancement towards the shared use path. We also included intersection improvements on Boxborough Road, South and West Acton Road, which will include an intersection realignment, corner radii tightening with crosswalks and ADA compliant curb ramps across Boxborough Road and South and West Acton Roads. A more long-term option that we have for this intersection is a mini roundabout with crosswalks and curb ramps and shared lane markings, also known as sharrows, to guide cyclists through this intersection. And some of the first year projects in this area include the sidewalk construction and reconstruction of Crescent Street, slow road curve ahead signage on Red Acre Road at the Stowe's northeastern entrance between Acton and Stowe. Also share the road signage on West Acton Road. In the northwest quadrant, examples of the types of improvements in the plan include pedestrian crosswalks with ADA compliant curb ramps, as well as pedestrian signalization at Great Road and Harvard Road. We also included advisory bike shoulders along Packard Road, and advisory shoulders are marked shoulders with dashed lines that provide space for cyclists. I'll go into more detail about advisory shoulders in the upcoming slides. We also included restricting truck traffic along Packard Road, which is essentially a very narrow corridor that's been said to be unsafe due to heavy truck traffic. A good thing to know is that restricting a roadway to truck does require completing a study and approval from Mass DOT. And those two things, unfortunately, are not funded through the Complete Streets program. We also included intersection improvements along Harvard Road and Garner Road, as well as Taylor and Boxborough roads, which includes realigning the skewed intersection on Taylor and Boxborough to a T-type intersection. And this will be supplemented with crosswalks and ADA compliant curb ramps. And some of the first year projects that we have in the northwest quadrant include slow road curves ahead signage and speed feedback signages on Boxborough Road and Taylor Road, as well as truck restriction and advisory shoulders on Packard Road. In the southeast quadrant of the town, examples of the types of improvements on the plan include advisory bike shoulders along Sudbury Road. There is potential to install a shared use path along Sudbury that would provide a safer connection for pedestrians and cyclists to get to the Sabbit River Rail Trail, the Lower Village, as well as to the town of Hudson. We also included advisory bike shoulders, potentially along the currently unpaved track road. This would be supplemented with crosswalks and ADA compliant curb ramps at the intersection of Track Road and Sudbury Road. Wayfinding signage will also supplement these new networks to provide a wayfinding for people to get to several destinations, such as Lower Village, the River Rail Trail, and Hudson. We also included intersection improvements on Gleasondale Road and Marlborough Road, as well as State Road and Sudbury Road. And some of the first year projects that we have in this area of the town include a warning signage on Boone Road and Gleasondale Road, as well as crosswalks and curb ramps on Sudbury and Track Road. So in the southwest quadrant, examples of the types of projects that we have on the plan include sidewalks along Old Bolton Road from Maple to Great Road, advisory shoulders throughout the entire portion of Old Bolton, so from the Bolton Town Line to Great Road. We have shoulder widening along Maple Street to accommodate cyclists, and an intersection realignment. So realigning the Scoot intersection at Great Road and Old Bolton Road to a T-type intersection. And this would be supplemented with crosswalks and ADA compliant curb ramps. And the first year projects that are included in this part of the town are the truck restriction on Wheeler Road and advisory shoulders and sidewalk construction along Old Bolton Road. So before we conclude the presentation, I'm just going to go over some of the design concepts that I just mentioned and that you will see on the plan. One of them being advisory bike shoulders. So advisory bike shoulders are shoulders along a roadway with unmarked center lines that provide a separated space for cyclists and pedestrians when bike lanes and sidewalks aren't feasible. They operate as a type of shared roadway environment where mixing, merging, and a lot of yielding are expected between the bicyclists, the pedestrians, and cars. They usually accommodate low to moderate volumes and provide a prioritized space for cyclists and pedestrians. An important thing to note is that drivers can't enter these shoulders to pass other cars, possibly, when no bicyclists and pedestrians are present or using the shoulder. The preferred width of these advisory shoulders is 6 feet. The absolute minimum is 4. The width of the car travel lanes would be anything from 10 to 18 feet, 18 feet being the widest to support higher volumes of cars. This maximum width also allows most vehicles to pass side by side without encroaching on the advisory shoulders. It's a requirement for the town to also include signages to warn roadway users of the special condition of the street. And an example of that signage is shown on the right-hand side of the slide. Lastly, because this type of roadway treatment is so new to the U.S., in order to install them, they have to be approved through a request to experiment process by the Federal Highway Administration. So Hanover, New Hampshire is one of the handful of towns that have implemented advisory shoulders. The town of Hanover was seeking a way to support more cycling, better walking conditions for pedestrians, and so they looked to provide advisory shoulders on one of their local roadways. I think this was called Valley Road. So Valley Road was an unmarked centerline roadway with 20 feet of roadway width and no sidewalks. And overall, the public's response was positive in that it provided a safe alternative to having no dedicated bike facilities and no sidewalks. And after the town had evaluated its success through data collection and analysis, they found that the advisory shoulders increase bike and pedestrian usage. Their police department also reported fewer problems with speeding vehicles. So the next design concept is shared use paths, specifically side paths. Shared use paths are facilities for non-motorized users like pedestrians and bicyclists. A side path is a type of shared use path that allow it to be immediately adjacent to a roadway and be bidirectional. Just as what the illustration above shows, this type of facility provides a more appropriate path for users of all ages and abilities than regular shoulders on roadways, especially on roadways that have moderate to high vehicular volume. Side paths require approximately 17 feet in width for space along the roadway, and that includes the path and the 5 feet buffer. So these paths are considered to be a more long-term project because of design, the extensive design that it requires, and the environmental requirements. And because they require a wide roadside environment to provide the appropriate separation away from the adjacent roadway, the town may have to take right-of-ways unless the full length of the roadway has the width to accommodate this facility already. Here are just a couple of examples of places that have shared use paths. We have the Sabit Rail Trail in Hudson along Main Street, and then we also have an example from South Lake Tahoe and Nelson, New Zealand. So a shared use path is great because they support existing rural character when combined with vegetation to visually and physically separate the side path from the roadway. So there are many intersection improvements to be considered throughout the town, and most of them include intersection realignment. Intersection realignment is a good treatment for when streets intersect at angles that are greater than 90 degrees, and this would create a complicated situation for pedestrians, bicyclists, and cars. They usually result in longer crossing distances for pedestrians and facilitate higher speed turning movements by vehicles. The intersection realignment strategies that we came up with for several locations in Stowe include reconfiguring the intersection by straightening the skewed approach, tightening the turning radius, and supplementing the intersection with crosswalks and ADA compliant curb ramps. So this is just an example of an intersection with a very long crossing distance and an intersection alignment that would allow vehicles to turn at high speeds. But when you slightly straighten the skewed intersection with corners that have a smaller turning radii and supplement it with crosswalks, the crossing distance for pedestrians reduces significantly, and vehicles have a more difficult time speeding at turning movements. Lastly, we also included project recommendations that include installing warning signages throughout the town. We have the no truck restriction that was recommended for Package Road and Wheeler Road that would prevent trucks from entering local roads and using it as a cut-through roadway. And as stated earlier, restricting truck traffic does require a study for and an approval from Mass DOT. Image number 2 is the slope pavement marking that was recommended for Package Road to slow down vehicular movement approaching Boxborough Road. We have the slow dangerous intersection sign recommended for South Acton Road and Tuttle Lane. We have the side road ahead warning signage recommended for Boone Road and Gleasondale Road that would tell drivers that an intersection with a side road is ahead. And this should advise drivers to slow down and watch out for incoming side traffic. Lastly, we have the share the road signage, specifically an emphasis on bikes. And this is located along corridors throughout the town, such as West Acton Road and Harvard Road, to advise drivers to be aware of other roadway users and to allow other roadway users to use the street comfortably. And that concludes our presentation. We are open to questions and comments. Sorry.
So we're going to answer your question, Don. I know we want to use the microphone so that we're taping this for Stowe TV, so we want to make sure other folks can see it. So if you could just repeat the question in the mic.
When you folks went out, when you were doing your surveys around town, did you actually go out to specific locations during rush hour, say, and stand there for 2 hours and observe what went on?
We did visit the sites. We didn't visit it multiple times to look at the different conditions throughout the day. But we also gauged the intersection problems through the wiki mapping that we completed and the feedback that we got from the public meeting.
I think maybe you're also talking about where we referenced surveys, and those were written surveys that were actually distributed by the town for other projects, and so that's what we were referring to in that instance. So we had surveys from the town for Gleasondale Road, which we used as well for community comments.
Another question, if I may. On your maps, I don't believe you're showing the 68 housing units on top of Boxborough Road. You don't show the road there at all. And that's a significant addition for various issues on Boxborough Road. And you're not showing that. I'm concerned why not.
Is that a recent residential development?
That's the new Toll Brothers.
Okay. So we use Mass GIS road inventory file, and their roadway file isn't really up to date. And so I think it's from like 2014, 2015. And so that probably wasn't, the roadway probably was not captured in the data file that we used. We can definitely update our roadway file to include that.
That's a significant change for the whole Boxborough Road area, which includes your Packard Road cut through, and also your three-way intersection, South Acton, West Acton, and Boxborough. Significant improved traffic and trucks additional.
So the scope of this study did not include any traffic analysis, so it didn't include doing counts or anything like that. So to kind of get at a lot of those conditions, we relied very heavily on all the community input that we got. So projects on the list are mostly all predicated from the input that we got on existing conditions from the community, and then we kind of supplemented those and figured out what the best opportunities were based on the existing conditions analysis and the different criteria that we had. So
I wonder what would happen if, this is a nasty question, I suppose, but wonder what would happen if all the vehicle and truck speeds were relatively enforced throughout town. Would a majority of these projects not be needed? I'm wondering about that, because a lot of these things seem to be trying to move traffic at the current speed, which are, in my opinion, quite excessive. So I'm wondering how many of these projects would not be necessary if, in fact, speed limits, truck sizes, truck speeds, whatever, and another part of that, your bicycle people need to obey the rules. It's just like pedestrians and cars. They do not. So if all these things were enforced, I'm wondering how many of these projects would really still be necessary. I know some would be. I certainly encourage them, but I'm wondering how many really would be still.
Don, I think that's a fair question. I'll just answer from my own personal perspective. As a person who primarily cycles, but also spends some time as a pedestrian on the road, and I have a decent amount of familiarity. So we have a decent number of roads in town with reasonably high speed limits. So, West Acton with 40 miles an hour, pretty much no shoulder. South Acton Road, 45 miles an hour. Hudson, 40, 45 miles an hour. I think even if we were to enforce those speed limits, there's still a condition, especially for the less experienced road users, where they would not feel comfortable without the enhancements that we're recommending. Folks who ride 50, 100 miles a week might feel comfortable with the conditions we have now, but if our goal is to get more people out of their cars, younger people, older people, I think the improvements, even if people obeyed all the rules, will be a really nice enhancement to town and make it a safer and more enjoyable place for all users.
It seems like the enforcement of the rules is the easiest part. It doesn't take any money.
Sure it does. Of course it does.
Why?
We need more cops.
Have them on the road more often.
They're on the road all the time, though. All the time. There's 2 cruisers, just like every town around us. There's 2 cruisers on the roads 24 hours a day, doing really nothing but traffic enforcement and visiting sites. I mean, get the reports that come out every Monday that are public information about what they do. I mean, of course it takes money. I think Margie's point is well taken. People are going to drive the speed that they think the road allows. So actually, I think the posted speed doesn't have a lot to do with it. It's how wide it is. And like one of the changes that they're recommending for South Acton ought to help reduce speeds. If you narrow the travel lane for the cars, and people realize that, it shouldn't go as fast. I'm not a traffic engineer, but I think that that's what traffic engineers believe. If you narrow it, people will drive slower.
Yeah, so just to wrap up that comment real quick, so there's kind of two strategies that we've focused on, and one of those strategies is design, and so narrowing, for instance, intersections, but also roadway corridors. That's a design feature that can help slow traffic. But then also we rely on signage and the expectations. So a speed study and lowering speed limits can help to a certain extent, probably not as much as design. But also signs just warning or reminding cars to share the road, that there are dangerous intersections, that there are curves ahead. Those also play a role as well.
Hi, I had a comment and then a question. My comment is about South Acton Road. I drive that most days on my way to the train station. My wife does the driving, but I don't regard that road as overly wide, frankly. I mean, you've got a big truck coming in the opposite direction, especially when it's snowy and raining or something like that. I do not regard that road as overly wide. That is not a super highway. To me, that road is about as narrow as I would want a road to be, frankly, at any speed. And secondly, I have a question about the access shoulders. I live on Packard Road, and that was one of the places you were talking about access shoulders. Are they always on both sides of the road, or can they be on one side of the road? Because Packard is extremely narrow. I just don't see there's room for a shoulder on both sides and leave even one car width down the middle.
It can just be on one side of the road. Also, because cars can also encroach on these shoulders, they're made to be a shared roadway environment type of installation. Advisory shoulders work well for narrow roadways in that regard.
I mean, it's all very well to put these lines on the road, but it still relies on the fact that drivers actually have to see the bicyclists or the pedestrians. And to me, it seems like it's much easier for the driver to look in one direction than it is in two directions. You know, if you have an advisory shoulder down one side, it concentrates their view on that side.
Right.
If you've got something on both sides, you know, it's much harder. I mean, to me, it seems like it would be safer for the bikes. Admittedly, there is you have to cross it maybe at one spot, but the overall safety on a very narrow road would actually be enhanced by having, one place for the drivers to look.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that could be looked into in the design phase of this project, if it moves forward. But as you mentioned, generally it's preferable to have cyclists be able to continue on their side of the road. So that could still occur if a cyclist would maybe just not be in the shoulder in one direction, would have to be in the travel lane in one direction, and then would have the shoulder in the other direction. So it's something we'd want to look more into.
Do these access shoulders
comment.
allow bicycles to travel in both directions on the shoulder, or is the theory that they only travel in the direction corresponding to the side of the road that they're on?
Can I do a visual demo?
Well, that is. I mean, I see what you. No, I see what you've got up. I see what you've got up there.
So the cars share the middle lane.
Right.
And if there's not a cyclist over here, if two cars come across each other, this car ducks right and this car ducks left, and they just drive on the shoulder. And then the cyclists and the pedestrians in either direction limit themselves to the shoulders. So if there is somebody there, the cars would have to yield. But if there aren't any pedestrians or cyclists here, the dotted line indicates that the cars can occupy the shoulder.
So what you're saying is that basically the cyclists would just go in one direction on each side.
Right.
Yes.
So the cyclist would still do the normal expectation for moving with traffic.
What about pedestrians, though? Presumably pedestrians could go on either side. Right?
I mean, pedestrians
Do whatever
technically are
they want.
supposed to be facing traffic, but
All right. I still don't think that if you put one of these shoulders on both sides of Packard Road, the space that's left is actually going to be even big enough for one car.
and I think that's a valuable comment. Again, we would want to do survey before pursuing a project like this, and I think also looking into a one-sided advisory shoulder would be appropriate.
Yeah, we did have a long discussion about, so I think our thought as the Complete Streets Committee was that because this is such a new concept, we wouldn't want to put a ton of them across town. So we spent a fair amount of time discussing, you know, a small subset of roads that we thought seemed most appropriate to try this out. Packard was one, there were a couple others. And one of our thoughts too was it's an experiment, it involves a little paint on asphalt. If it doesn't work, it goes away.
The other part of the question, is there in fact a mechanism where if we try something and it doesn't work, we can undo it? I mean, is there a rollback mechanism built into this process? Is there any kind of like a trial period, or I can try it, see if it works, and then is there a review period where either a town meeting or some other process say, no, we hate this, take it away?
Yeah, I think I can speak from the committee standpoint, but I'm going to let Liz answer that first.
Yeah.
So because this requires the request to experiment from FHWA, you are required to do a reporting back to FHWA for the success of the project. So that would be one part of that. But then I guess also from a town perspective, I'll let Jesse talk more about that.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons why we created the Complete Streets Committee, because we knew we were not going to be able to say, here's all these solutions and our work is done. We know it's going to be long term. We know there's going to be some bumps, and this is exactly what we want to do, is try to figure out, you know, there's not a lot of easy solutions, so let's try some different things. Let's make sure that we know that we're trying something that is at least been done in other areas and that we have some data on, and then see how it works. And then the committee can come back to it. We can hear from residents in that area. How did it work? What did drivers think? We have a lot of different ways that we can do that. So it's definitely an iterative process, and that's just why we set it up in the way that we have.
These advisory shoulder, as Margie said, is very new. And I don't think anybody on the committee is interested in the town being like the first people in the region to be doing it, except maybe on really low traveled roads. The advantage of them, though, is that really they're not telling you on narrow roads, like 18 to 20 feet wide both ways. They're not really telling you to do anything other than what you got to do anyway. You know, what do you do on roads like that? Well, you want to pass a bicycle, so you move a little bit out, unless there's a car coming the other way, in which case you go back and you wait, and maybe you get ticked off, and you wait for the car to pass, and then you go around the bike. That's kind of what it's telling you to do.
Yeah, I guess I'm worried that you're coming down, you're in the middle, the truck coming towards you, he doesn't know what you're supposed to do. I mean, maybe you know, but because you live in town.
Well, you just hit the nail on the head, I think, with the problem with it, which is that people are unfamiliar.
If you're out of town, I don't know what to do with this on a road that now looks like a one-way road.
Until it gets more familiar. You know, so maybe right away isn't, yeah, you're right. That's the problem with it, that people are going to see it and say, what do I do? They're not going to know that they can drive in the bike lane, unless, of course, there's a bicycle there, or a pedestrian. But there is going to come a day, and it's not going to be that far away, when people become more familiar with these things. But again, I don't think anybody on the committee is really talking about being on the bleeding edge with these things. But
Where we are. You have to bring in examples from New Zealand. You know, that's like,
Well, the example from New Zealand was just a shared use path, which we have many of those in Massachusetts. They're a beautiful way to get around. For the advisory shoulders, you are required to have the signage that's on the slide, so that will help explain. But I think your comments are, I don't know your name, but that it's basically what you would do anyway is true, and sort of you're following the same expectations that you would follow anyway. So I think the signage will help explain that a little further and also make it clear that it is a two-way street. But yes, with any new improvement or any change to a traffic pattern even, there will be an adjustment period, of course.
Are you planning on doing a townwide assessment of the speed limits? Because as you said, some streets are too fast, some are too slow. Typically the cars go what they think is okay. And I know a lot of the streets that I walk on, cars go a lot faster than I would drive myself, but then I'm an old guy. I have an old car. But take Packard Road. I mean, to me, anything over 25 is not safe to drive in that road, but the typical speed is probably 30 to 35 on that road. I walk there every day, I see that. And about 20 to 30% of the cars are out-of-state plates. So we've got a lot of education to do. And there's a lot of people, Stowe is really a cut-through town in general. You get someplace else. You see so many out-of-state plates, cars and trucks. So we've got to keep in mind there's a lot of education. Anyway, but thank you. You're doing a good job, I think. You're trying. And hopefully we can get some current things going in a year or so. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I can just respond to the speed thing. Right now, we are not going out to try to hire somebody to do a townwide speed study. What we have done is we got several of the signs that are able to record speeds, to record the type of vehicle that's passing, the number. We can figure out the percentiles of which people, how fast people are going and what percentage of people are going over the speed limit. And so we've been circulating those around town. And so we're trying to basically do some of this in-house and get a good picture of how are people using the roads, what is the perception of speed versus the actual speed. And then I'll be honest with you, since the speed limit process is in general complicated and lengthy, and as we've said before, sometimes you get the outcome you weren't expecting. Really, we're trying to think about, what kinds of design issues, what kind of design concepts can we put forward, whether it's tightening some of these intersections or doing some of these other things to try to get at the speed issue from a different way. And so, there's just all of these things kind of, you saw how many people commented about high speeds. It's definitely not lost on us. I think the fact, just because there's not a townwide speed study at this time doesn't mean that's not still one of the main factors that we're looking at. So,
And a speed study, the speed study itself would not be covered under the funding program. So the funding program would be able to pay for the physical signs, but not the actual speed study itself. So.
What's interesting, if you ask the police, they'll tell you.
If you ask the police, they'll tell you typically they pull your neighbors over for speeding. So it's almost like we've got to educate our own people too in town. A lot of them go just too darn fast. They don't realize it. New cars, pretty fast around those curves. So it's an education process also by our own people in town, for our own people, whether they're walking, bicycling, or driving.
other questions, comments? Maybe we can, go ahead.
So, so you have 104 projects?
107.
What's the process for choosing the first group?
Yeah.
Because imagine it's a number of things.
Yep.
Good question. So what is the process for choosing the first set of projects?
So I walked through some of the criteria for prioritizing, but for actually choosing the construction schedule, we have been relying on the Complete Streets Committee to let us know which projects make the most sense in terms of what's going on in town for other projects and opportunities that have presented themselves. And so right now we have kind of the first 5 or so years worth of projects with an anticipated schedule. So the first year of projects will be applied for Tier 3. You can get the construction funding for that. You would have to construct them within a year, and then you are eligible to apply again in the next year for another round of funding if you so choose. And again, we'll have that schedule kind of already fleshed out, but it could change. So next year, if some other project happens or something changes that the town's priorities maybe shift a little bit, then you could move a project up from the rest of the list and say, this is what we want to apply for the next year. So we kind of have a framework for it so that you can move forward and not have the process be as heavy a lift as this year, but there is still flexibility in terms of scheduling projects out for coming years. Yep.
What about projects that aren't on the list? I didn't see an awful lot for Gleasondale. If this is 5 years out, does that mean it's an additional 5 years before you're looking at things in Gleasondale? Crosswalks,
Yeah.
sidewalks, even the house pedestrian.
Yeah, with the 107 on here, there's quite a few that we didn't talk about today. And so, yeah, I know Liz could probably talk about it too, but, there's some really actually high priority projects in Gleasondale. We know we've got a lot of issues in Gleasondale to try to contend with. You've got narrow roadways, you've got high speeds, not a lot of places for pedestrians, as you know. So we actually spent a lot of time at some of these meetings kind of discussing all the different design options that Howard Steinhudson had talked about being potentially used. And so we came up with a set of options because we know we haven't done the design and everything to really know what would work. So we were leery to say, oh, it's got to be sidewalks on both sides. Maybe it's something on one side of the road. Maybe it's, we talked about, for instance, we let Howard Stein Hudson know about the school lot project that we had worked on and how there could be potential for looking at sight lines to do a crosswalk there. Something near the cane land to let people in and out of that project. We talked about the Marlborough Road, Route 62 intersection, the Sudbury Road Island at Route 62. So a lot of these things came into play. Now, some of them are simple. Some sidewalks, crosswalks, once you get some sight lines down, something relatively simple. Some of these were definitely bigger issues, looking at something like reorganizing one of those intersections. Let's say it's Marlborough Road. And really thinking about, we should probably look at some concepts and try to figure that out. So,
Is there a list of those 107 people to look at?
So the list is still being finessed at this point with the Complete Streets Committee, but then once that is finalized, I believe, well, it'll be uploaded to Mass DOT, so it'll be public there, but I'm sure also you'll be able to view it from the town. So.
Yeah, so we're going to get it up on our website. We just basically had a big bunch of potential projects. And so what we've asked Howard Stein Hudson to do now, part of what this meeting is to actually get them in some sort of coherent order. And they're actually going to give us some estimates on how much they would cost to complete. So this is just a way that the town can actually look at something and say, how feasible is this to really do 2 or 3 years from now? Do we need some other study before we can do it? Or can we actually go out there and get some signage done in the first year, that kind of thing? So we're trying to figure out what is the low-hanging fruit and what is the stuff that we really need to put a little more thought into.
Jesse, would it be fair to say that this prioritization plan is a living document? So, we identify our year 1 projects and they get funded, they don't get funded. We continue the dialogue with the community. Additional priorities get identified. The list of priorities shifts up and down. So I think one of the things we're mindful of is we have an early submission deadline this first year. That's one of the reasons I think we're picking projects that are maybe easiest to implement rather than highest priority. But as we start getting things on the ground and as we continue to have discussions in the community, I think there are always opportunities to add or revise things if we feel like we missed something or we have a different take on something after some additional study. So I think that's one of the exciting things about the process.
Yeah, I just have one final comment. So I think it'd be really useful to try and get some data. So in other words, before we do any of this stuff, maybe we're already taking data about how, I guess, if anybody gets injured, there is data. The police take data on accident statistics and stuff like that. I don't know whether there's any way of getting data on, near misses or stuff like that. But if we do something to change an intersection or a street or something like that, it would just be really nice to know how we actually improve matters or have we made something worse. And ideally, you don't have to wait for people to die before that happens. And I don't know how that ever gets reported. I guess any kind of a small accident gets reported, but I think we should be thinking a little bit about data collection because we really want to know kind of early, is this stuff helping or is it not helping? I don't know, is there any techniques for doing this?
So the near miss question is a great point, and that's actually something that we talk about a lot. What is the best way to capture that? Some things that have been tried in the past are just online reporting. So there's not really an existing database for near misses because the police don't get called. There's no EMS report. So it's it's a tricky question to address, and it's something that we talk about quite a bit as transportation planners. So if you have any ideas, let me know. But yeah, so online reporting is one way. I think there are some apps that have been developed where you can just kind of log the location, so that might be something that could be
I mean, I
looked
guess
into.
the problem with that is it's very subjective. I mean,
Yeah.
some people will think, hey, that guy came pretty close to me when he was, 10 feet away or whatever it is.
I mean, that's kind of the nature of a near miss, I guess.
Yeah, but I presume anything where there actually is a pedestrian, any kind of an accident is logged by the police. And is that automatically folded into your statistics? In other words, do you have like an online feed from the police department? Is that data made available to the committee so you guys could act on it?
So there's a statewide database which does have quite a few gaps because often municipalities don't communicate directly to that, and so we relied directly on the town to help provide that information.
So you are getting that from the town. I mean, you have
Yes.
accident statistics from Stowe Police.
Yes.
And one thing I would note is the chief of police sits on the complete streets
Okay.
committee. We have a really useful group. We got the chief of police, the fire chief, and the highway superintendent are all like sitting at the table. And so we have a combo of these Harvard and fast statistics. But then we also have the anecdotal reports and insights from, Jesse's on the committee, so we have the town planning. We have some real excellent expertise, I think, at the table to process that kind of stuff.
I mean, it's very easy to pick up the anecdotal stuff, but I think
Agreed.
the statistics would just be really nice to know. Like, are we doing something that really makes a difference here?
Any other final comments, questions? So I'll just give a little discussion of next steps here. So Howard Stein Hudson, Elizabeth and Casey and Lou, who they're working with as well, they're gonna put together this final prioritization list with the comments that we received tonight from the last meeting and from the committee itself. So we'll end up getting what kind of look like a big boring spreadsheet, but nonetheless all the information is in there. And then that is going to become kind of this living document. We'll submit it to MassDOT. Does not mean that MassDOT is coming out to town and doing projects. The onus is still on us to say we are going to submit a project to get done. We feel it's ready. So those conversations will come, as will conversations about concept plans and talking with the abutters on these more intensive projects as time goes on. So once we do have this sheet here with kind of the estimated costs, the reasons for proposing it, we'll get it up on our website. We'll make sure that it's something that people can comment on. And we've been posting our meetings at the Complete Streets Committee. We'll, I think, as soon as we get a chance to finally see this document at the prioritization level, kind of understand what the next year or so looks like, I think we'll have a lot of things to talk about and to sort out. So that should all be coming relatively soon in the next month or so, because I think May 1st is when. Is it May 1st that you want to
April 1st for the prioritization plan, and then May 1st for the tier 3.
Yeah, so I mean things are happening fast. So May 1st, if we had some new signage that we thought would be a no-brainer, some pavement markings slow on the road, things of that nature that really don't require the kind of studies, Mike, that you were talking about. Those are the kinds of things you can do in year one. So we'll try to pick off some easy stuff that we think is good bang for the buck, and then we'll go back and try to look at some of the more complicated stuff in depth.
Will you be any of this stuff that's town meeting?
Good question. So some of the stuff that's a little more in depth, like developing some concept plans in some of the high priority areas, that's something we're considering bringing to town meeting to get some funds that will get us a little further down the line on some of those projects. But we're leery of identifying a lot of high priorities and then just looking at them. So we really want to be able to take the next step on some of these. So I think you will hear something at town meeting. We haven't quite gotten it onto paper yet. Any other questions about next steps or where to get more information? I want to make sure that people are able to see this. So you'll definitely find it on the planning board website. It'll be on all of our stuff online, and you can certainly come by the office and pick up stuff or ask questions as necessary. So great. Well, Liz, Casey, thank you so much for coming out. Thank you all for coming out and taking part. And just be in touch with any questions you have, and we'll be sure to try to keep all of this out there for everybody to see.